Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Greatness Glory podcast. We're back with Kevin here today. We're going to have some discussion about the subject of courage and the nature of fear and how is it important for spiritual progress as well as success in life. So let me start by saying that in all spiritual traditions and religions, courage sometimes being recognized as the highest important quality for spiritual progress and self-realization. Because courage is a state of intensity and determination where it can help you to not give up on your spiritual progress, especially on higher levels of practice when a lot of obstacles come up, a lot of demons come out of you that you need to face. And physiologically speaking, when you have courage, you feel confident, you feel intense, you feel undefeatable. So it's important to develop this courage in spirituality as well as success in life. Nothing can be achieved without courage, right? So a lot of Eastern traditions such as Hinduism, Tantra, Vedanta, and so on, they also consider courage as a very important quality for progress in life and spiritual ascension. And in Vedanta, the root cause of fear is known as avidya, or lack of knowledge, or simply ignorance. The way that they explain it is the fear happens because of ignorance of thinking that you are a mortal human body, and the way to overcome it is to meditate and understand that you are an immortal soul that nothing can harm. And you see this all over the Indian and Hindu traditions, such when you read the Bhagavad Gita, for example, which is in a way all about staying in your state of courage so you can overcome the obstacles and not losing your way. Like Swami Vivekananda said, behold, be strong, throw away all weaknesses, stand up and fight. This fight here is not about physical fight, it's about fighting your weaknesses. And I heard that the Prophet Muhammad said also that the greatest battle is the battle against your ego, which is not fighting yourself, but fighting your weaknesses and overcoming your defects and weaknesses so you can transcend. So courage also, it is considered as a one of the highest vibrations, energetically speaking, of being. Even in Tantra, which is not about sex, again, that's a misunderstanding, like many other things like yoga and whatever. Anyways, in Tantra, which is a path of inner ascension and expansion, also courage is critical. To develop that courage and steadiness so you can rise beyond your limitations. Same is true for shamanism. Shamanism is also a path of warriorship, to be a warrior of light, to be centered within yourself, within your soul, and not allowing anything to make you weaken. And we had a session last time that we talked about psychedelics also, and psychedelics and shamanism and tantra are very related as well. And in working with psychedelics, which is just a medium for you to access your inner world, the underworld, subconscious mind, your shadow, courage is critical to not be shaken by what comes up, because all of these, whatever we call like evil, the monsters, the darkness, whatever that people see, we discussed last time that it's a part of your own psyche. It's like a dream that you're having a nightmare and you're afraid. But if you realize that nothing can really harm you, it's only your fear that can harm you. And the importance of courage, I want to use a different quote also that says, a coward dies many times. The valiant never tastes of death but once. Basically, it says when you live in a state of fear, you die every day. You die many times a day. But when you have courage, even death cannot cause you to be scared or shaken.
Thank you, Isaac. Thank you for having me. What a wonderful topic. I really welcome the subject and the idea. As we've said before, a lot of people unfortunately live in fear instead of love. And my question is, do you think fear is natural, or is it part of the illusion of the Maya?
If we live from a state of body, which is like being just a biological creature, just like, let's say, animals, I don't think animals can become fearless, like they don't have fear at all. Or maybe I'm wrong, but as long as I know, 99% of animals are not like that. And of course, some animals are more courageous or whatever. But the reason I'm mentioning this is to say that fear is a program in our biology, in our physical human nature, and it's put in us by nature to help us survive, because mostly before we learn how to manage life and situations, we are the creatures of habit and emotions. We need certain signals from nature to survive. The very reason that maybe you don't put your hand over the fire is because you feel it's going to cause you suffering. So the fear, as nature is concerned, is important for survival, but to say that fear is necessary for you to live, it's also ignorance. There's a saying that says, feel the fear and do it anyhow. And we can do a lot of practices to eradicate our fears and phobias and so on. But I feel the greatest thing that helps you instantly overcome the fear is to develop an ability to face your fears and ignore them, and don't allow the energy of the fear to take over you. So as a spiritual being, fear doesn't have any place. It's all a part of your biology and body. People go and drink alcohol and they say, oh, I'm fearless now and I have more courage, because they override their biology with some alcohol or drugs or whatever. And you can do the same thing by developing that quality of courage within you, by facing your fears. So as nature is concerned, yes, fear is there to help us survive and avoid what is harmful to our survival. But when it comes to success in life, as well as in spiritual ascension, if the fear is not overcome, then we will live a very limited life, being controlled by our fears.
So, if it's a positive influence that fear can have, then does it have a role in spirituality and awakening?
The role that it can have is that it helps you see there are a duality within you. There is fear, something unpleasant, something very powerful, negative, whatever you call it. And then you learn to separate yourself from it and not be influenced by it. We talk a lot about the concept of the witness consciousness. When you learn to be an observer and not allowing the play of mind and emotions to affect you. And this is extensively explained and studied in Buddhism and yoga and so on. So when you practice remaining a witness, you will see millions of emotions and thoughts and things like that might come up, but then you learn to ignore them and not allow them to influence you. So there is a saying, and then again, this is coming from Imam Ali, that says, in in animals, God put like fear and lust without intellect, and in angels, God put intellect or intelligence without fear and lust. And a human being is a middle point between the two. And if you allow your fear and your lust to take over you, then you will become less than animals. And if you use your love, your courage to overcome it, you will be even higher than angels. And then this being said in Bhagavad Gita, that fear and lust are the two doorways to hell. And this hell is not a place, it's a state of being.
Yeah, and it is my understanding that also in almost every sacred scripture, you know, the most repeated word is "do not fear." And how do we distinguish then the difference between fear and recklessness, fear and taking risks?
Very good question. So I see this a lot of time, people that are reckless and they don't have the ability to predict the consequences of the things. They act out of an emotional state of just having that quality, just like ignoring the fears. Like, you take a look at a dog. Sometimes I see the dogs, there is a small dog, he wants to fight the dog that is like 5 times its size, or like attack people and so on. I'm sure everybody has noticed that. And you see the dog, when you look at him, it's like, this dog is stupid, like he's gonna get killed or be torn apart by a big like Great Dane dog or whatever. But the dog doesn't have any ability to think about the fear. So that's a, let's say, limited compulsive state of courage, when you just like don't have the ability to see the consequences, right? And you see all the time animals, because they don't have the same intellectual capability, they might get destroyed. A car might run over them because they cannot predict, oh, this car is coming toward me and it might run over me, right? So the courage that we're talking about is a courage that is consciously created. It's not an unconscious thing. When you have fears, you want to, I even mentioned this example in my book, like you want to ask somebody out, and then you have some fears, and then you use your logic, your intellectual capability to question that fear. Like, what's the worst thing that can happen if I do this? And you see a lot of time, just by asking that question, you see your fears are extremely exaggerated and are not logical. So consciousness, mindfulness, and consciously thinking is the same thing that I mentioned, that animals don't have that ability, but we can use our consciousness, our intellectual capability to question things, to question our fears and our other emotions, to override them and be able to control them. You see, for example, when we say faith, a strong belief, or even love can make you fearless in religions. Why is that? Because it helps you develop that quality, which is a higher vibration, a higher in energy than fear, to override the fear. So there are people that they might get into a state of faith or courage temporarily or whatever, and then they do things that we consider, wow, like how did that person do that? You see, for example, in Christianity, like in the history, what was the name of the first Christian martyr? I think Saint Stephen, or if I'm not wrong. Anyways, like you see, when he was to be prosecuted, he was fearless. When you go and see Jesus himself, like, did he have fear? He was on the cross, being nailed to the cross, and was praying for other people to be forgiven. You look at Sufism, Mansur Hallaj, a great Sufi, the history says that this guy was prosecuted in a very bad way by the religious leader at that time. And he was like having a game. He was like laughing, and he didn't even care. This ability, this courage is created by that practice of devotion, faith. Whether you have a faith that I am an immortal soul or God is protecting me. And you know, in many Hindu traditions, including the ancient religion of Jainism, for example, there is a term for a fearless person. It's called Vira, which basically means a courageous person. And it's considered a high spiritual quality that needs to be developed if you want to overcome your human limitations and experience your divinity. When you are in a state of fear, what happens to you? You contract, you pull back, you uh, run. But when you have the courage, you are demonstrating more consciousness. You're like, this fear is here. I am going to look in the fear at eyes, and I'm not going to let it overcome me. You can develop this ability by many different things, by questioning, by studying, by working on qualities, and doing affirmations for a while, and things like martial arts and so on. But the greatest way that I have found to overcome the fear, a state of fear, is to gradually face the fears. And this is also one of the teachings of psychology. It's very obvious. Like, people who have phobias, the therapist might say, okay, try to face it a little by a little. Here's the tricky part of life. As long as we don't face the fears, and as long as we run away from them, they're not going to be fixed. They're just going to stay there. If you want to overcome the fears and limitations, you need to develop that courage to face it. And when you face it, you'll see that it was much smaller than what you think, because our minds exaggerate everything, and all the worries and fears. Oh, what's going to happen? And then again, fear is a product of the mind and imagination. The same way that I said, like, animals are biological creatures. An animal is not going to sit and think, oh, tomorrow the lion is coming to eat me. It's concerned with the moment. But us human beings, we abuse our power of imagination by worrying and letting those nonsense thoughts overcome us. So if you were to control your state of being by controlling your mind through yoga and meditation, by controlling your energies through breathing practices and so on, you will develop a much stronger ability to determine your state of being, which will help you to choose how to be. They say a human being is called a being because he knows how to be, but we don't exercise that because maybe nobody taught us and we didn't look how to be. But spirituality, especially like yoga, the Buddhist traditions, and shamanism, and so on, are the paths for helping us master our state of being. If you are in fear, you cannot transcend. If you are in fear, you cannot develop like high qualities in you. You cannot go deep within yourself. You know, there's a lot of demons inside us. There's a lot of demons inside us. There's a lot of illusions, ignorance, and to overcome those fears, we need that courage. In Buddhism, for example, a concept that exists that says if you want to succeed in your practices and become if you want to, in Buddhism, there is an important quality that is very well known that they say if you want to succeed in your practice and spiritual progress, you need to have very firm determination. And you see this in life of Buddha. Like Buddha suffered for many years, and at one point he said, I'm going to sit under this tree and I'm going to either die or find the path to freedom and become free. And they say he sat there for many days. There are different versions of it. And he was like all bone and skins. But finally, because of his firm determination, he was able to see the truth and become free and free other people by sharing his great teachings. So to develop courage, it's a process. You need to work on it. I suggest you face one fear a day. Maybe you want to ask for a raise from your boss and it's very difficult for you. And then you make yourself do it. And one of the techniques that I love about overcoming fear, which has helped me a lot, is to imagine the worst case scenario. And a lot of time you see the worst case scenario is not even as bad as your emotions are showing to you, that, oh, I'm going to die and be destroyed. When you imagine the worst case scenario and you become okay with it, then the fear vanishes a lot of time. Like you want to go ask for a rise from your boss, and then you say, okay, what's the worst thing that's going to happen to me? Or my boss is going to take out the shotgun and shoot me in the head. You laugh at that. Like, okay, he's going to say no or whatever. Or you can apply this principle to many situations. And this is powerful because it doesn't need you to do years of psychotherapy or meditation or whatever to use it. A lot of time you can instantly overcome the fear by just asking yourself, what is the worst thing that can happen? What is the worst case scenario? And a lot of times you see it helps you overcome it. Another technique is to imagine the scenario where you're afraid of something and reprogram it in your mind. And you might need to do this for multiple days. And for example, you're afraid of the dogs, and then you keep in a meditative state, close your eyes, relax, and then imagine you are petting a dog and the dog is kind to you and nothing happens, and then you came out of it successfully. So that's for it.
Yeah, thank you. And but since you mentioned animals, I wanted to distinguish instincts versus fear. Like when you're bringing up the question of, going to your boss and asking for a raise. But if your instinct, your gut feeling, like says, hey, just like that animal that acts out of instinct, says, well, maybe I shouldn't because he may fire me or find a better candidate.
Okay. And instinct is the same thing. Like we say animals have instinct, for example. Sometimes people say same as intuition, whether it's true or not. Instinct is something that when I look at it in the right way, it gives you a signal, not necessarily by fear. Where is fear created? Fear is created in your mind. Again, the animal doesn't have imagination to predict the situation and say, oh, I'm going to do this and then this is going to happen to me. So instinct is a signal that shows you something, and people misunderstand instinct, or let's say intuition, by emotions. When intuition comes in, if you're referring to that, intuition is a very subtle signal. It just tells you something in your heart. It gives you a signal, but your fear comes out of your reaction to that feeling that you're experiencing. So you create the fear, you create the suffering for yourself by reacting to those signals. Is all instincts that you feel true? A lot of it is emotion. It's like a lot of it comes from your trauma and past. It's a programming in your genes, let's say. So it's not always a intuitive signal.
Got you. And you mentioned spirituality. We brought up spirituality, fear, and distinguishing the difference between that and instinct. Is it possible for a human being in a physical body to fully transcend fear?
The only way to fully transcend the only way to fully transcend the human limitations and fear is to realize who you are. If you realize that I am not this mortal body, where is you? You think you are a body? Nobody has ever been able to scientifically prove that you are a body. No scientists have ever came up with a firm conclusion that what we call you, your consciousness, is in this part of your brain. And that's a famous topic. It's called the hard problem of consciousness. And that, to me, is a very clear thing that the ancient traditions, such as Vedanta and Buddhism and so on, are right when they say you as the witness consciousness, you as the soul, you are in this body, but you are not the body. Let's say you are the driver of the body and mind, but you are not it. And the driver cannot be destroyed because it's not physical. And unless you transcend your physical nature completely, I don't think you can absolutely transcend all the fears and human emotions and limitations. And the shorter way is to face some of your fears and develop that energy of courage within yourself. But in long term, when you transcend your biology, when you transcend your mind, then only you can become fearless. And we gave examples of those beings, ascended masters, that even at the time of their prosecution, they were fearless. They didn't suffer. They were in such a high state that what happens in the body didn't affect them. And you'll see also this with the concept of celibacy and controlling sexual desires. And this been said in many ways in Hindu yogic traditions, that you cannot transcend your sexuality just by suppressing it or just by turning your face from it. It can only happen by becoming more mature spiritually, that you transcend it naturally and you see it as something that is within your biology, and then you are beyond it. Let's say right now, you know that thing that was in ancient Rome. I just gonna give you an analogy that people were fighting and killing each other and whatever. You know, the person who was in the middle of the fight
The
maybe was,
gladiators.
yeah, gladiators. Thank you. The person who was in the middle of fight maybe was scared to death, but the person who was sitting and watching, he had a lot of fun even. Or it's just like a movie, that you're watching a movie, unless you're very emotional, you're not afraid, or you don't think that the monster is coming out to eat you. You know, it's just a movie. So when you get to that spiritual state of realizing that whatever happens in your mind is just a game, it's just play of the thoughts, and it's like a dream, then only you can transcend it. Let me
But you,
be back.
yes,
And another thing that also came to my mind, because we talk a lot about religion and misconceptions, you see in a lot of Abrahamic religions, they talk about having fear of God. Why would you fear God? This is also a false spiritual teaching. It's a misunderstood spiritual teaching. Even some of the Hindu traditions, I think, adopted this idea in more of the modern times from some of these Abrahamic religions, said like having a fear of God. But originally, God was all about devotion, love, compassion, connecting, feeling secure, feeling that you are embraced by God, Holy Spirit, whatever. And then it doesn't make sense at all, because the highest state of devotion is when you are in a total surrender and you feel absolutely secure and loved and in love with God or your deity, whatever you call it. So, biologically speaking, you cannot be in the state of fear and love at the same time. When you develop that devotion, love, bhakti, in that state, fear vanishes. So this is also something that came to my mind to mention, that the vibration of love, courage, is a very high vibration compared to the vibration of fear. So it doesn't make sense to say you need to have fear of God. You need to have respect, devotion, love, faith. Why would you want to create a fear in you, whether it's for God or whatever? The religions sometimes came up with this idea to make people behave. The religious leader created these rules because they thought, if somebody is going to do a bad thing, if you say, oh, if you do the bad thing, you're going to go to hell. And they even explain the fantasy details of it, saying, oh, you'll be burned 7 times every day, and whatever else that exists in Judaism and Islam and whatever. And this is going to happen to you. You're going to suffer heavily. At the same time, they said, but if you be a good human being and behave, then you're going to go to heaven. They give you 72 virgins. They're going to give you a river of milk and honey and whatever. For people of that time, maybe it was a good idea, even though it's false, to encourage people to behave. But it's not a spiritual principle. In a spirituality, we're not looking after going to some heaven. We're looking to develop our own divine qualities and experience the heaven here.
Why is fear even a virtue or a value?
Well, it's not. I just said it.
No, I mean, sorry, I meant courage. Let me repeat that. Why is courage even a virtue or a value that we consider in the spiritual world as what's the term?
Nah, skip this question. I already explained it. Go to
Yeah,
next
okay,
question.
okay. I'm out of questions. Do you want me to just come
You
up with
come
a
up
few?
with some. I use. Do you use all the questions I sent you?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Isaac. My other
Ah,
question is
نه نه start again. 3
thank you,
2
Isaac. My other
نه
question is
بایستا بابا لیوانو بذارم زمین.
oh, I thought
3
you did.
2 1.
Thank you, Isaac. My other question is like distinguishing fear from anxiety, because I think anxiety is so prevalent nowadays in people's lives that we may confuse that with fear. And is it the same? What are the similarities and differences and the role of anxiety when it comes to the spiritual path?
I feel like anxiety is a more dominant day-to-day thing that some people have, uh, and fear is more of like a intense version of it. And then anxiety, psychologically and biologically speaking, when people have a lot of anxiety all the time, it comes from abuse of imagination again. It comes from beliefs that we have, our self image, that we feel like we're not safe, we're not secure, and all the time we are defensive, in a survival mode, uh, in a fight or flight state, a high cortisol state, and it becomes more like biological. And then people go to the psychiatrist and they get some drugs, and for a while it helps them suppress that anxiety hormone. But when we speak about fear, we're talking about something that you immediately feel, and then you show courage to face it and make it vanish, whether it's a small thing or somebody is aiming a shotgun on your head.
Thank you, Isaac. Before I move to the next question, I wanted to ask you about any advice you may have for people who deal with anxiety and fear on day-to-day basis. Maybe you have some techniques or things that have worked for you on the spiritual path, or um, with any number of other disciplines that you've been involved with, from martial arts to meditation. and yoga?
Yes, very good question. There are countless techniques for this situation. And let me start by saying that we are multi-dimensional beings, which I explained in the beginning of my book, Art of Balance. And we can use different dimensions of ourselves to make things happen. So let's say body, when you are in a state of fear, let's say if you were to do some intense exercise, do some weightlifting or go for an intense run, you'll see that you will change that state of anxiety a lot of times. Or you could do a simple breathing practice, one breathing practice that been studied even scientifically, which works very powerfully to override your state of fear and anxiety, is this thing that Andrew Huberman calls physiological sigh, which is again coming from the yogic breathing practices where you take two quick inhales and then you exhale, preferably a little bit longer, like this, for example. And you see a lot of times when you are in a state of fight or flight, if you use this technique a few times, it will give you control over your state of being. Breathing practices, also known as pranayama in yoga, is one of the most effective things that you can learn to control your emotions, your instincts, your compulsions. It really gives you ability to control your neurology. You can learn to create a good state, pleasant state, even courage, even high energy within yourself. So you can go for a run, you can weight some lift, you can do the breathing practice, and you can also try to question the fears, like the question I mentioned, what is the worst thing that's going to happen? And telling yourself that I am beyond this fear. This fear doesn't have power over me. Sometimes you might want to see yourself as a huge person, like it psychologically helps you feel more confident. Another thing, according to the principles of yoga, and this is studied and proven by science also, your bodily position helps you override your state of emotions. Let's say when you are in fear, what happens? You contract. And when you're courageous and confident, what happens? Your chest is more outside, you're sitting straight, you're standing straight, and those things. Ask yourself, how would I pose my body when I feel confident and courageous? And then hack your brain with doing that physical position. Like you can stay in that position for a few minutes and breathe deeply and repeat some affirmations that I'm powerful, I can do anything, blah, blah. And then you will see that gradually you will learn to control your anxiety.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And can the collective fear, the social, cultural, ancestral, like you could even say the anxiety we inherit through ancestral karma or ancestral trauma, which can be inherited, uh, is it possible to break away from that, chain of vicious cycles repeating over and over again?
Yes, fear, whether you learn that fear from somebody, whether it's coming from your life experiences and traumas, or even if we believe some fears subconsciously or let's say genetic, and we can change them. We have the ability to override. The problem is that majority of human beings don't live consciously, and the number is actually very high. When you start doing some spiritual progress, you do some meditation, you do some mind training, you do some breathing practice, or you do martial arts and so on, then you start bringing some awareness, consciousness within your life and taking more control of your life. Somebody asked me is there free will or not? Because some people say, no, there is no free will. My opinion is your free will exists to the extent of your consciousness, your mindfulness. Because it's only when you are mindful, you are in the witness mode, when you don't allow your physical nature to control you, which is not a overnight or even a 1 year process. It's a lifetime process. When you develop that ability and you stay mindful, and you can go and study about mindfulness in Buddhism, it's explained better than anywhere else. You can study the work of Thich Nhat Hanh, amazing teacher. He talks a lot about mindfulness. When you develop that mindfulness, then you can transcend those states of fears. Whether some fear is ancestral or genetic, even science, after many years where they believed a lot of things like disease or some qualities, you cannot change it and it's just passed to you through genetics and whatever. Later, I think it's Dr. Bruce Lipton that has amazing work on this. And if I'm not wrong, actually, he was the person who came up with the idea that actually it's not true. Just like the ancient systems have mentioned that you don't inherit some disease from your parents or some qualities. He came up with this concept or science to show that your genes don't determine your health or your qualities. It's the environment that determines if those genes will become activated and affect you or not. So, environment is not necessarily the external environment, they are your mental, emotional environment. Whatever you feed, it becomes stronger. If you don't feed your fears, they don't find room to grow and get over your life. So everything is at your control. And we going to have one discussion later about the topic of responsibility, where we're going to discuss that everything is your own responsibility and at your control. So that's also important to understand that everything is our own creation.
Yes, thank you. And I think fear of death is one of those fears, as someone who's worked in the hospice field, that is rather, sort of ancestral, that gets passed on from generation to generation. And you mentioned the external environment. It's a very cultural how people feel around death. In certain cultures it's very taboo, in certain they celebrate death. What are your thoughts on fears of death?
Very good question. In the Eastern traditions, in yoga, in Buddhism, in Tantra, Shamanism, and so on, fear of death is considered as the root of all fears. Because if you were immortal, if nobody and nothing could harm you, what is there to fear of? What is there to be afraid of? It's only because you think you are a mortal flesh and bone human being that you have fears. So in yoga, it's been explained that when you overcome the fear of death, which is one of the, if not the highest, one of the most high achievements that you can have in spirituality, when you overcome that, you become immortal in a way.
Thank you, Isaac. Going back to fear of death and transcending that, just to be practical, as a podcast, what are your suggestions around, people who um, may even avoid that conversation or thought and sort of run away from it? Because I've seen many do it, and I think death could be rather beautiful. However, it's something that's very much taboo, especially in our culture here in the States.
Death cannot be beautiful. Death doesn't exist. If body is born which is a state of biology, it will also die. The fear comes from you thinking that you're the body, and message of all religions and spiritual traditions is to show you that you are not the body. And you can start by studying. When you study some spiritual texts, sometimes it gives you some intuitive insight, some courage and confidence, faith that helps you develop that courage to understand that death is not a bad thing. It's just a transition from one state of life to another state of life.
Yeah.
And that's the first stage, by studying and contemplating on those concepts. And then when you become more meditative and you go into deeper state of consciousness and being, and you experience yourself as the soul, as the consciousness, as the divine spark, then the real transcendence happens. And there is a poem by Rumi. He has amazing poems on death. If I can find it, I will translate. 1 second. So Rumi says, on the day of my death, when my coffin is on its way, do not think I have pain of this world. Do not weep for me, and do not cry, alas, alas, for failing into the snare of the demon that is alas. When you see my funeral, do not say separation, separation, for union and encounter will be mine in that moment. When you consign me to the grave, do not say farewell, farewell, for the grave is a veil over the gathering of paradise. When you see my descent, look upon my rising. Why should setting of the sun or moon be harmful? To you it seems a setting, but it is a rising. The tomb seems a prison, but it is the soul's release. Which seed fell into the earth that did not grow again? Why then should you doubt the seed of humanity? Which bucket went down and did not come up full? Why lament for the well of Joseph, the soul? Close your mouth on this side and open it beyond, for your song will be heard in the sphere where there is no place. And I think we can end this episode by this.
Thank you.
Thank you
That
so
was actually
much.
pretty beautiful.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you. And see you next episode.